Just a moment.
Here we go. We're ready.
There we go.
That's all it took.
I muted the mics earlier, so.
All right. Good evening. This is the April 18th Committee of the Whole. I have 7:30. Before we start, the floor will be open to the audience for 20 minutes to address the City Council on matters that are on the agenda after the City Council discusses with staff. We ask that persons wishing to address the City Council keep their comments to 5 minutes in length. Comments must be addressed to the council as a whole through the mayor, and profanity may not be used in any form. The first item we have on the agenda is the tree preservation ordinance update, and I'm going to defer to Joellen Charlton, who will give her presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. We're very happy to be back again tonight in front of the Committee of the Whole to talk about the tree preservation ordinance. Just to give a little bit of background before I get into some of the meat, this has been a hot topic for the last couple of years when we first discussed it in 2020. And it all started back in Ward 2 with the destruction of some legacy trees as part of a subdivision development. We did meet with the council and took a look at the actual scenario, and it's shown in this image above. This is the subdivision where we had one house on the north side of Fairfax, and it was subdivided, I think, into 4 lots. And prior to that subdivision, all of the trees that you see on the left side were removed, as you can see on the right side, greatly affecting the enjoyment of the 10 properties with backyards that front onto that development. So in August of 2020, we began the council discussion at a committee of the whole, and because of that scenario, I think council at that point agreed that there was some merit to moving forward with the tree preservation code update. However, there were some caveats. I think the council had some very good discussion at that meeting and wanted to make sure we found the sweet spot between creating some regulations but also protecting private residential property owner rights. So we wanted to be able to limit process and penalties when we have an existing property owner that needs to remove a nuisance tree, so that was something that came out of that discussion. We also wanted to provide people with an opportunity not to be impacted negatively by this code if they had an invasive tree or some willows or their trees were diseased or storm damaged. We don't want to penalize people and subject them to this code if those conditions exist. We also wanted to not be punitive if somebody wants to come in and make an improvement or do an addition to their property. So that was some very good feedback that we received. At the time, we had reviewed similar codes that our city forester, Graham Strebler, had from some of our other communities that have long implemented these types of codes. And so we talked about the triggers, and there was some concerns about which was the right trigger for Rolling Meadows. Some communities tie it to when zoning relief is requested, but the lesson that Graham said he learned from some of his counterparts in other communities is that's pretty easily to circumvent if you just clear the site before you apply for the permit. Some communities regulate by the size or the type of tree. They choose the legacy trees or only trees larger than 12 inches. Some are triggered by the location or the size of the property. So if you have a small property, you might not be subject to it, but only the larger properties that would be part of a subdivision might be included. And in some cases, that it gets to when you have a certain number of trees being removed at one time on one property. This group in 2020 also talked a little bit about programs that include a fee in lieu of. So if the tree gets removed and they can't put it back on the property, can we collect a fee in lieu of that and then use those funds to produce or provide trees in other areas? So as a result of that conversation, some of the final direction we got from council is let's take a look at some more ordinances that are a little closer to home. So we expanded our research and looked at codes for Arlington Heights, Palatine, Schaumburg, Hoffman Estates, and Mount Prospect. Also very clear direction a very good direction to solicit input from the Environmental Committee. And then to really kind of look at everything and bring back an ordinance that meets the specific needs of our community. I did mention it. I'm here tonight. I was hoping Graham Strebler could be here. He has been at the head of this code update since the beginning. He is out of town on training tonight, so I'm stepping in his absence. So I hope I do it justice, and I hope I can answer any questions that you have moving forward. So again, Graham was very instrumental in taking all of this feedback, talking to his counterparts, looking at codes from municipalities far and near, and making suggestions that we modify the provisions of our existing code in the vegetation section. It's section 114. That section is currently organized into 2 articles, and I think over time those types of codes typically look at public trees and public trees only. Over time, as we began to address nuisance trees on private property, a lot of those codes got intermingled into the same article. So it really made sense as part of our update to reorganize the existing chapter into 4 separate articles as defined on the screen. So Article 1 would look at definitions and purpose. Article 2 would focus on public trees. Those first 2 articles are pretty much just very minor updates based on Graham's experience of things he's noticed in the past. So very few updates in that section. Article 3 is where we focused the majority of our efforts for trees on private properties. And that's where we contain the bulk of the new information. Article 4 is something that we're recommending be repealed from the code. So we can talk about that a little bit more. So what did we do in Article 3? Article 3 is where it makes it unlawful to remove a protected tree on private property, except when, and here's where your feedback came in, we have a residential property that is less than 20,000 square feet. So what does that look like? There's a map on the screen that shows in green all of the properties that are less than 20,000 square feet that are zoned residential. All of the yellow properties or white properties are zoned residential, but greater than 20,000 square feet. So they could be suspect to the code. That 20,000 square feet restriction, however, does not apply if somebody on a 20,000 square foot property or less is removing a collective 54 inches of diameter of protected trees. So what is that? So if you have 2 24-inch trees at 4.5 feet above grade, that's about that big. If you have 2 of those and then another 6-inch tree, you would be subject to this code. But we also included some additional provisions that would not make you subject to this code. So if you're a homeowner and you're coming in and you have those willows or buckthorns or invasive trees, this section of the code will not apply for requiring a permit. Also, and there's additional ones listed in the code. These are some of the highlighted ones. If there's an emergency, so if there's a storm or other damage occurs to the tree, a car hits it, tree needs to be removed, we're not going to subject you to the provisions of this code. The code also provides for replacement trees and or a fee in lieu of lost trees. So if you're subject to the code and you come in and you get a permit and you need you exceed that 54 inches, you would then have to provide replacement trees on the property. If the code applies to you for any other reason, like you're a commercial property, for example, no replacement trees would be required if the cumulative diameter of the trees being removed is 24 inches or less. If you are required to provide replacement trees, the formula would be 1 tree for every 24 inches of removed trees, and then it would have to be placed on the property where the trees are being removed, unless they can prove to Graham, the forester, that it's impractical or that there's no other way to accommodate safely the trees on that property. In that case, the alternative would be for them to pay a fee in lieu of providing trees on the private property. That fee is based on $250 for every 12 inches of tree that is removed. So when the trees are required, we have some certain minimum requirements for what needs to be placed to meet the code. The trees will need to be at least 2 inches in caliber. That's a pretty standard size for planting new trees. It's got a big root ball. It takes it a while to grow, but it's a little safer to plant those trees than the larger trees, which take a little bit longer to get established. The trees need to be replaced within 12 months of removal, and you need to pick from the approved species list that we have listed in the code. And then finally, I think the last thing that people wanted to see was to make sure we had an established appeal process for this code. That code is set up to provide the Public Works Director with the first review of that appeal. And then 2 additional levels. If it needs to go beyond that, it would go next to the city manager and then ultimately to the city council to hear the appeal request and make a final decision. So where are we? We, all the way back in 2020, we first started talking about this. It did take a lot of work to review all the codes and do all of that, but we also had some resignations and retirements in Public Works that we were dealing with, so we had to switch gears a couple of times. But we're back here. We presented to the Environmental Committee as recommended by council at both their March and their April meetings, and Alderman Sonoyka was leading that group and has been part of those conversations. I will note that we also do have a member of the Environmental Committee in our audience tonight. Dr. Kohler is here and can speak to any questions you might have potentially about that. We're here tonight at the Council Committee of the Whole review. And we did make a commitment to the Environmental Committee that we would take your feedback, incorporate any changes into the document, and provide them one last opportunity to review kind of a clean copy. So with any suggestions you make, we'll incorporate that into a new copy, send it to them, hopefully about a week prior to the meeting, so they have plenty of time to read it. And then we'll be looking for their final recommendation, which will be presented to council at your May 8th meeting. From that point forward, we'll go through first reading, second reading, assuming that gets approved by council. Our goal, and the last thing I want to talk about, is an effective date. We are going to propose that we make the effective date for this code September 1st. That will give us time to develop some educational and promotional materials, distribute that to the residents and to the contractors who do work in the community. We also would all need to generate some application forms, and hopefully, I'm hopeful to talk to Glenn and Elizabeth in community development about using the EnerGov software to do a permit tracking system. Ultimately, hopefully that can also be online. You can go to the portal, submit your information, and hopefully avoid a lot of red tape at the city. So that concludes my presentation for the update to the code. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Joellen. Appreciate that. It looks like Alderman Bessetti has something.
Just a couple of quick questions. One, great job to the Environmental Committee and those who worked on this. Second, in the packet it mentions about permits and that. Was there thinking that that would be a free permit? There would be no permit fees
Correct.
for something like this? Because I don't want to give another reason for somebody to try and skirt the process.
That's the way it's currently written.
Okay, that was it.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Bessetti. Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Hopefully, again, kudos to the team on the work on this. Just 2 quick things. Once I figure out how to spell cumulative and spell check, can we make sure that's added in there? Because I'm like, I don't remember seeing that as I prepped the material, because that was great clarifying point. What you made is it's cumulative.
Okay.
So if you've got a 12-inch and a 48, like that would like cumulatively. And then just from my own, and like in lieu of 250, is that in accord, like, I don't even know what a new tree costs, because I guess my only concern is like, if it's 500 for a new tree, are we gonna incur staff time? Because somebody might just say, hey, here's your $750, because it's saving me $1,500 to go buy new trees. So I would just want to make sure that's in alignment, and it might be, because I'm certainly not the tree expert. I just want to make sure that it wasn't like, it was in line with what it would cost for a new 2-inch tree, so we weren't tying up staff time, which costs money, obviously, versus somebody doing it themselves. That the
So
fee
keep
would
in
be in
mind,
alignment.
yeah, I think the fee in lieu is intended to provide extra money that we know our staff can acquire 2-inch trees for. You probably couldn't go to retail and buy it, but at wholesale for
Okay.
our group, it's things that we could do. And the money is intended to go into a tree replacement fund,
Right.
which is essentially the general fund. But what we're proposing to do, after talking to Molly a little bit, is track the funds. So if we collect $5,000 in tree replacement fund in 2023, we would know that it goes into the general fund, but we would budget in the budget a line item for tree replacement in '24 for that amount. So it's intended to be kind of a replacement. So maybe not one-to-one,
Right.
but would be used for trees on public properties.
Perfect. Yeah, just making sure we were covering our costs versus somebody saying, yeah, city, go ahead and do it because I'll pay the in lieu of versus 500 for a new tree if I did it myself. Thank you.
All right, Alderman Snorka.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And to Alderman O'Brien's question as well, ultimately, when the committee, the environmental committee reviewed a lot of the different ordinances, there were some communities within Chicagoland that were significantly higher than 250 as a means to encourage a specific behavior, which was preserve tree canopy. And so from feedback from the council, as described by Assistant Director Charlton, we decided to limit that or to decrease that amount to something that would be more in line with what the council had provided in direction previously.
Great. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. It looks like you're looking for,
any changes, so thank you for the one change. I saw you take that note for me,
Okay.
thank you. Is there any other modifications, questions, things you'd like us to look into before we finalize and present to the environmental committee? Just
A question.
Go ahead.
So the number of houses, it seemed like substantially, like 85 to 90% of the houses would fall into the under 20,000. So are we sure about the cumulative number that, I mean, if the house only has two 24-inch trees, we're basically allowing to clear cut the house, right?
Yeah, that would be the correct assumption. We don't know where those trees are. They could be right off the edge of their patio. They could be, closer to the lot line and having an impact on a neighboring property. But by, hopefully by knowing the code is there and at least asking some questions, we can dive into some of those issues with those people. But yeah, we were trying to ease in, if we find, it will protect the situation that occurred on the larger properties. If we find after 2 or 3 years that 20,000 or, the inches of cumulative trees needs to be reduced, or we need to reduce the size of the property, we can come back to you. But we were hoping to follow the direction of the council and start slowly.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Snorka.
Since that item was brought up, I did want to provide additional context from the environmental committee when we spoke with residents as well, who had expressed some concern where if they wanted to cut a tree, that they were concerned that they would have to go through a permitting process and take staff time, take their time. There was also some other recommendations of working, if you're going to work through a third party or a third party landscaper, that perhaps it wouldn't be as burdensome, because the expectation is if you're working through a third party that they're going to investigate permit requirements anyway. So that's certainly something that if you would like on the final review for the committee to review, we can review what kind of impact that we could anticipate if we were to decrease that minimum number of cumulative width. I'm getting a yes. Okay, we'll take a look. I'll make a
Yeah.
note of that as well.
And the mapping tool is great. I mean, we could modify the numbers down to 15 and see, do we open up a number of properties that would be impacted by that? We can also look at, maybe down to 48. So it's 2 trees, but it's probably not more than 2 trees. Whatever the direction of council is, we can certainly ask the committee to vet that a little bit further. Maybe look at a couple of example properties.
Thank you.
Alderman Bessetti.
Yeah, I would encourage, go ahead and take a look at it. But in the rough math that I've done, I can speak at least for the houses within my ward. If we go down to 15, now we're starting to include quite a few single-family homes that are there. And I don't know that that's the intent of this.
Just want to do a point of clarification. So it's the 20,000 or the cumulative. So regardless of the size of the property, if you have cumulative 54 inches or larger, then this
Yeah, no issue
ordinance
there.
would apply.
Yeah,
Okay.
no issue there,
Okay.
but I was saying that, would it have to be, so let's say you're taking down let's say it's a 50-inch tree, one tree, but your lot size is 25,000.
Then it would apply because you're over 20.
That's what I'm saying. So if we go down to 15, it doesn't matter how big the tree is.
Right.
You know, so I would not suggest going down below the 20. I think it's very well written the way it is.
Final thoughts from anybody? Okay. And you have what you need?
Really appreciate your feedback. We'll get this back to the committee and bring you something back with a little bit more explanation in our staff report.
Great. Thank you, Joellen.
Thank you.
All right. That brings us to our second item on this agenda, the refuse rate discussion and discussion of utility rate study recommendations. And we are going to defer to Molly Talkington and some representatives from Baxter and Woodman. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. We're first going to talk about the utility rate study. So to put this whole thing in context, we started last year's budget for the 23 budget process. One of our recommendations in that was we wanted myself and City Manager Sabo to kind of get our feet wet, get into the city a little bit more, and start to understand the funds and what goes into them a little bit better, and come back with what we're calling our fiscal stability plan. So this is really kind of kicking this off for council. So we're going to look at the utility rate study. This is one of the first ones we're looking at because the timing was actually kind of nice. You guys had the water main master plan presented to you in February. So using that really current, fresh data we have from Baxter Woodman, we were able to then use that information and other financial information to provide to Baxter Woodman, and they came up with our rate study. The really big thing with both the utility fund and then also for our refuse fund is they're both enterprise funds, and the nature of enterprise fund is that they're business-like in nature. So typically when we look at revenues for these funds, we look to see that the revenues have a nexus to what we're doing and they're self-supported. So you're not typically looking at things that like property taxes or sales taxes to support your business-like funds. You're looking at those user fees to support the services that are provided. So for our utility rate study, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Chan and Eileen Kennedy, both here from Baxter Woodman, and they're going to go through their analysis for you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I know everyone loves talking about money, especially their water rates. As a resident myself, this is a huge concern for all of us, of course, and so there is going to be a lot of information being presented. If at any time you guys have questions or would like me to slow down, there will be a lot of charts, figures, and tables, so I'm happy to slow down at any given point for any of that. So with that, we'll kick it off with a background for the city. Currently, the city serves approximately 24,000 customers. This is largely residential, however, there are some fairly large industrial users as well as a plethora of mixed commercials. For the water, we purchase our water from the Northwest Suburban Municipal Joint Action Water Agency, otherwise known as NSM JAWA, who in turn purchases treated Lake Michigan water from Chicago Department of Water Management. So we all have treated Lake Michigan water here in the city. For wastewater, the city does own, operate, and maintain sanitary sewers and lift stations, and essentially what those are just pump stations to convey your wastewater out to the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. This is all nicely summarized with blue lines for water and a green line for sewer. You'll notice a theme throughout the rates where sewer tends to be lower than water, and again, this is mostly reflective in the fact that we have to buy the water first, and then how the sewer is charged is actually through property taxes. MWRD assesses that separately based on your house. With that, a high-level overview of what was done. We took a look at the city's historical expenses and revenues. I actually was I was the project engineer at the time for 2018's rate study. At that time, it was more of a small-scale update to just see what was necessary to pass along some temporary rate increases while evaluating a $4 million bond for the enterprise fund at that time. So we did not do a comprehensive rate structure analysis then, but that was being included as part of this. So what does that entail? It includes taking a close look at the user groups in particular, largely those residential, commercial, and industrial users, as well as the equitability and financial sustainability of the existing rate structure to finance the needs of the enterprise fund covering the utilities. And finally, for all of the evaluations being conducted, what we really wanted to take a look at is how do we stabilize the rate increases? We don't want to have a single year where the rates shock any of the customer types at all to suddenly drop back down. how can we stomach the rate increases over time so that it's the most manageable, fair, and sloped, if you will, as opposed to stepped, to get up to where the city needs to be in order to finance its needs specifically. With that, we take a look at how the city's annual water purchased and water billed has trended. In the blues, you'll see the amount of water that the city has been purchasing for the past 5 years, and in red, you'll see the amount of water that the city has billed. Generally speaking, the gap between the blue bar and the red bar represents non-revenue water, or the water that is not being sold, essentially, but is being purchased. Right now, the city has been staying at a consistent average of about 9%, which is well below, or it is below the IDNR's 10% goal limit, in which case, if a community falls above 10%, they will have to submit an action plan to the state to report what activities they are going to take in order to reduce that non-revenue water over time. Some other key notes on this is that the overarching water use is starting to decline. I think this is a general pattern that we've seen across the Chicagoland area. It's nothing too severe at this time to be concerned about where the city has lost some major users or anything like that. It simply is a lot of turnover and high efficiency fixtures, and just generally people being more cognizant as rates do tend to go up. Users start to water their lawns a little bit less. In general, water just starts to be used less and less as the price goes up. However, what happens ultimately with the changing patterns of water usage can have a significant impact on how the revenues end up for the enterprise fund. So we're going to walk everyone through how does the city obtain the revenue for the enterprise fund. And it's comprised of two major components. The first is the volumetric, which is rated out at a per 1,000 gallon amount. So we can see here that the village has what's called an inclining block tier structure, where the first block, which is 0 to 15,000 gallons in a month, which is the billing cycle, is charged at a lower rate than the rate that is assigned after 15,000 gallons, again, for that given month. On the fixed side of things, we'll have an access fee. And right now, there is a water access fee at $2 a month and a sewer access fee at $1 a month. That is assigned to every metered customer in the city. The stormwater fee is a little bit unique. The city did conduct a stormwater management study a few years ago in which a specific study was conducted to evaluate what are the stormwater management fees based on the impervious surface lot of each individual parcel. So things like parking lots, driveways, that sort of thing. Depending on your parcel, you pay a proportional share based on that fee. All residents are covered under the $4.76, however, so every resident is equal. It's the larger lots and properties that scale up. Are there any questions on this? Hearing none? I know this graph is a little hard to see, but we'll walk everyone through it. This is a histogram of the city's monthly billings based on the total amount of gallons used per month for the year of 2022. And I'll draw your attention to the left first, where we have 0 gallons. There were 4,000 plus bills in which 0 gallons were recorded. So if we are taking a look at how the city generates its revenue, for 0 gallons, the city is only bringing in $2 for the water access fee, $1 for the sewer access fee, and then $4.76 for that stormwater, assuming it was a residential property. That is a non-negligible portion, and we'll cover that more as we kind of go through the slides, but it's something that I wanted to bring everyone's attention to. The next is the first large bar that you'll see for the 0 to 5,000 gallons. This is in line with what we expect for a 2 to 3 person household residential user, and to no one's surprise, I think, Rolling Meadows is highly constituted of residential users. The few but many customers way up, well beyond 250,000 gallons, however. This is going to be a key topic as we kind of get into some of the later slides here, where although the total number of bills that are charged at those tiers are small, you'll find that they actually constitute quite a large amount of water that they are using per month, upwards of 1 million gallons per month for some of those accounts at the highest end. That's about 66 times more than the 15,000 gallon tier that exists right now from math. Like Molly said, understanding the enterprise fund is crucial. I think sometimes not everyone has a key understanding of that. These rates pay for the services that are being rendered, full stop. So that's everything from the water that we purchase to the infrastructure necessary, whether that's the pumps, the elevated tanks, storage, water mains, the water meters, everything. Same thing for sewer. and we can't really rely on outside funds to support this. There are no real outside funds that come into the enterprise fund to support the needs of the utility system. With that, we identified with Molly what the city's operating reserve goals were. Historically, the American Waterworks Association has identified 25% of a municipal's operating expenses, which are your annual total expenses less capital depreciation and debt, to serve as the operating reserve goal. However, in recent years, they've really pushed each utility to identify what works best for them. So in discussion with city staff, we did keep the 25% operating reserve goal. However, we did add a $2 million capital reserve goal. This would act as a buffer to allow the city to handle larger capital expenses without the need to readily borrow debt or increase its total debt. Any questions before I jump to stormwater on that? Hearing none. For the stormwater management fee, as I mentioned, the city already did conduct a special stormwater management fee in which each individual parcel was assessed for the total impervious surface area that they would contribute for stormwater runoff. Again, these are things for flooding protection, storm mains, and managing the waterways that they let out to. For this purpose, we really just took a look at how do we balance the stormwater management rates based on the existing equivalent residential units, where one equivalent residential unit is 3,604 square feet of the impervious surface area. Again, this does cover all residential lots. And those rate increases were determined in order to allow the city to handle its upcoming stormwater expenses. So in the blue line that you see there with the dots, that's going to be the stormwater specific revenue being generated. We can see that in the past, the fund has operated at a surplus compared to the red bar, which are stormwater operating expenses, so administrative and things like that, where the gray bars represent specifically the stormwater capital improvements. We can see that with no rate increases over the projection period through fiscal year 31, obviously the stormwater would continue to decline. Now, in most utility cases, stormwater is actually separated from water and sewers to be an independent fund, and that way it allows more transparency to track how it behaves on its own and to manage its own special operating reserve and capital reserve. In this case, we can allow the city to manage what the rate increases are because it does share its balance with the water and sewer to mitigate the overarching impact up front for the increases necessary to allow the stormwater to continue to be self-sufficient. So here we can see what the proposed rate increases are for the next 8 years or so for the stormwater fee. You'll see that we only increase it from fiscals 24 through 27 before allowing it to level out. This allows the graph to look like this, where the revenues are operating at a deficit for the years in which capital expenditures are high for a specific project on the stormwater improvement side, but allow it to build back up. Are there any questions on stormwater? Sure. So stormwater, again, like we said, is special because of the ERU, where water is based on your volumetric use or just your access charge. The stormwater fee is going to be based on that ERU lot per that study. Since we are not reevaluating the total amount of impervious surface area, this was going to be the easiest rate structure to kind of modify, if you will, because a lot of that work is already done. And really, we're just making sure that are the revenues breaking even with the totalized expenses. Due to its shared nature with the water and sewer portion of the utilities fund, we are able to handle a deficit like this for the first 4 years to mitigate the immediate shock that otherwise would occur if rate increases had to break even in that very first year for fiscal 24. Moving on, as Molly mentioned, Baxter and Woodman did complete a recent water master plan, as well as the city having already taken the proactive steps to complete a sewer master plan as well as a stormwater master plan. In the early parts of the discussion for the rate study, we took a look at what we call this kind of full-scale capital improvement projects, where what would ideally the city spend towards its water, sewer, and stormwater CIP in order to try and address its aging infrastructure. Based on those studies, we took a look at $3 million for water, $1.5 million for sewer, and $500,000 for stormwater. As we can see here, the city has had a couple years of kind of anomalous spending. This is largely attributed to COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the $4 million GEO bond that was taken out to then pay for a specific project, which was finally expended in fiscal year 20. Otherwise, we can see that in general, the city has spent relatively low amounts of capital towards addressing its aging infrastructure. And so with these comprehensive master plans for water, sewer, and storm, in this ideal world, we're taking a look at nearly $5 million in capital improvements almost every year through the projection period. We can see here in the blue line again is going to be the revenues, and in the bars you have the breakdowns of your expenses, red being your operating expenses, blue is your water CIP, green is going to be the sewer CIP, gray is stormwater, and then the pink salmon color is going to be debt service, which are the remaining GEO bond payments, as well as an existing IEPA debt. Obviously, with no rate increases, there are a couple things to note. The first is that the revenue actually does exceed the city's operating expenses. So what that says about the existing rates is that it is sufficient for the sake of operations, but in terms of addressing its aging infrastructure in the form of capital improvements, it is behind. To nobody's surprise, what happens if we don't raise rates? We end up below zero by a fair margin. So what would it take in order to raise these rates? Well, they're pretty extreme, and they have to be upfront to some degree in order to allow the city to manage the first year of deficit. So you'll see that there is a pretty severe rate hike in the first text box, which is going to be the access fees for water and sewer. That's that fixed amount right now set to $2 for water, $1 for sewer. And then in the next two boxes, you have the increases in percents to the volumetric rates, both water and sewer, both below and above 15,000 gallons. With that, the goals of the model were to allow the city to maintain no less than $1 million in reserve at any given time to handle any emergencies that may occur, while allowing it to also build its reserves back up by fiscal years 31. This, go ahead. If there
I
are
was just going
questions.
to ask you, can you go back one slide?
Yes.
Okay, and those are per month, right?
Yes, for the access fees, this would be a per month charge, and then based on those volumetric rates would be their monthly usage, essentially.
So $10 increase access fee, $1 on the rate there, and $4 on the other one. Okay. Thanks.
Yep. We did, however, feel those increases were extreme. So
I'll take my money now.
With that concern, we did take a look at what we're calling a reduced capital improvement project expenditure, where we take the water down to $1.5 million, the sewer reduces down to $1 million, and stormwater is kept at that $500,000. That's considered usually the minimum amount to keep investing for flooding protection. With that, slightly less capital being projected through the forecast, we can see that, again, with no rate increases, the deficit remains. However, it becomes less severe and, to some degree, fairly manageable. These are the rate increases, then, with the city's existing rate structures that would be necessary in order to finance the reduced capital improvement projects plan.
You can see in the water access fee and the sewer.
Do you mind going to the
Yeah.
mic?
Sorry.
Thank you very much.
You can see in the water access fee and the sewer access fee that the increases are less upfront and more over time compared to the full-scale CIP. And this kind of levels out with the reduced capital.
It's a lot of numbers to take in, so if you would like me to come back to this slide, I'd be more than happy to. With that, the revenues you can see starts to take off. Now, again, like Eileen mentioned, we are able to lessen the immediate spike for those rate increases, especially to the access fee, by allowing the city to operate at a slight deficit for the first few years, but then regain its reserves over time. this starts to show a very similar fund balance graph where the lower of the two blue lines is that 25% operating reserve goal. The upper of the blue lines represents the operating reserve goal plus that $2 million capital reserve goal. With that, however, what we took a look at was the city's existing rate structures. So as we mentioned, the access fee right now is $2 for everybody for the water, $1 for everybody for sewer, no matter who you are. So in taking a look at this, we did a couple things that would alter how the city charges its rates to be more fair, equitable, and financially sustainable for the capital that it needs to repair specifically. So taking a look at this, the first concern that we took a look at is how do we scale that access fee? Kind of like the stormwater management fee, which is currently rated based on how much impervious surface area you have. If you are a larger user with a larger meter, is it fair that you are still paying $3 as a resident when you are being supported by significantly more infrastructure that is necessary to supply, deliver, and protect the water system for them specifically? In general, larger water meters are attributed to larger fixed expenses. And what we can kind of take a look at here is a generally accepted practice called the fixed scale meter rate structure, in which a meter ratio is applied to those access fees based on the meter size of that account. And why does this matter? I think a lot of times we forget that pipes actually are like pizzas, and they grow exponentially. So if you have a 3/4 inch meter, which is normative of every residential customer, or 3/4 inch meter or less, you pay that 1 meter ratio. And so right now in fiscal year 23, that would be the $3. However, as you go up this scale to a 6-inch meter, which requires, 16-inch water mains outside of it, it does require more storage for fire flow protections, larger hydrants, pump stations, all of these other pieces of equipment. You can see that for fiscal year 23, right now, that customer would also be charged $3. What we would propose with the implementation of the fixed scale meter is to scale that $3 or equivalent amount for a 3/4 inch meter or less, again, a residential customer typically, based on that meter size. Any questions on this? Yes.
Me again. So you're proposing going from 3 to 6 for the access fee?
Correct.
On the average normal home, basically? With
Yes.
7-inch pipe? Okay.
This might be more for, like, or obviously your expertise, like new homes and developments, because we've had a couple pop up. Is that still the standard 3/4 inch? Because I've been hearing, and just like some of it might be full inch now, or even inch and a half for a regular residential property. Is that true?
It depends on what they're building. So
Okay.
if they have a pool irrigation system that's designed, when the developers come to city to plan out their allocation for the amounts, that is when you will start finding larger houses have 1-inch meters. Or if they're at a dead end of town, which isn't very common these days, you might need to increase the meter size in order to allow the pressure to flow to that house. However, we took a look at the city's data, and almost all residents are covered by the 3/4 inch meter or less in this instance.
Great, thank you.
I'm just going to interject real
Yes.
quick. We do have one residential home, because they have, I believe, an indoor pool, and they requested a 2-inch meter. So there is one home that intentionally sized up their meter. All the rest are 1.5 inch or less.
Great, thank you.
With this application, the first thing we wanted to take a look at is for those number of customers that were charged at 0 gallons, where the city is costing themselves more to issue a bill almost and support these customers, $3 is pretty low at the end of the day. So what we did was we tried to bump up what that fixed amount should be, and this is accumulating the water and sewer access fee. Actually, this one is specific to the water access fee, so we'll see that we go from $2 to $4.24. Then we go from $4 to $6 in fiscal year 25 for that 3/4 inch, and all of the remaining meters are scaled based on that meter ratio. This is similarly true for the sewer access fees, where you go from $1 to $2 from 23 to 24, then $2 to $3, I'm sorry, from 24 to 25. Right now, for fiscal year 23, This is what the revenue generated by the access fee looks like. In the large blue part of the circle, those are your residential accounts, the 3/4 inch meters or less. We can see that the 6-inch meters and some of the larger other meters, 4-inch, 3-inch, 2-inch, and so on, pay a fairly small portion of the total revenue gained right now. Under the implementation of the fixed scaled meter, this is what the proposed breakdown of revenue would look like from the access fee. Any questions on the fixed component of the water rates and sewer rates? Hearing none, we'll turn our attention to the volumetric aspect of it. Right now, the city has a 2-tier inclining block in which we have that 0 to 15,000 gallons, 15,000 gallons and above for a given month of usage. However, the largest customers use well over 15,000 gallons consistently per month. We were seeing more than the top 20 customers use into the 200 to 300,000 gallons per month, then 300 to 600,000 gallons per month, and there are only a handful of accounts that are consistently using above like 800,000 gallons to a maximum of 1 million gallons in a given month in fiscal year 2022 alone. This to us looked as a hard choice for the city to then, how do you raise your rates for that above 15,000 gallon tier without penalizing those people who happen to just be right over 15,000 gallons? In order to be fair and adequate to those very, very large users, you're sacrificing the granularity of your rates to protect those that are falling closer to the tier starts. It's kind of like tax bracketing, honestly. So with that, we propose the inclusion of 3 new tiers. The first of which is going to be the 0 to 5,000 gallon tier, and this would look to protect and allow the city to manage its specific rates designed for those 2 to 3 home persons, where we can control them separately from the 5,000 to 15,000 gallon rates. Right now, we show a proposal to keep that $12 essentially for the 0 to 5 and 5 to 15. So essentially, they would see no change in that first year of implementation. However, for above 15,000 gallons, the 15,000 to now 100,000 gallons would keep the existing rate that the city has for its 15,000 plus. Once you cross 100,000 gallons to 250,000 gallons, we identified a new rate that would work best for them, as well as a new rate for those above 250,000 gallons, and this was applied for both water and sewer. With that, in the dark gray rows, you'll see the percent increases to the water volumetric rate for each tier. It is a lot of data. And although the percents might be slightly askew as far as why is one 3%, one is 4%, one is 5%, then the others are 4 and 5 as well, what we really drove as part of this was really taking a look at the dollar increase more than the percent increase. Since percents can be kind of misleading depending on the starting number, we really took a look at how do we control the spread of those rates by fiscal year 2031 to reflect the general expense burden that is being observed by the largest of the users versus those at the lower end. Similarly true for sewer. And what you'll notice is that at the end of the day, this accomplishes the same task that we showed under the increases to the existing rates, where the city is able to operate at a slight deficit for the first few years, but build its reserves. It looks extremely similar, and that was kind of the point where we are demonstrating 2 different ways to accomplish the same goals. However, the impact couldn't be more different to the customer base, as we were explaining between the differences of the fixed scaled meter and the modified inclining block. So on this graph, we'll see a sample bill for a 4,000 gallon per month user, residential, and in the light blue line, we have the existing rate structure with its rate increases being proportionally higher impact over time to a 4,000 gallon residential user compared to the fixed scaled meter and modified inclining block. We can see here that on the top boxes, these would be the percent increases on their monthly bill under the increases to the city's existing rate structures. On the lower table, those would be the percent increases to the residential rate under the modified volumetric and fixed scaled meter. We can see that we really softened the edge, especially in the upfront years for them. Yes?
I want to make sure I'm reading it right. So what you're saying for 2024, $6.51,
Mm-hmm.
then in 2025, another $6.80?
Correct.
And then another $4.18? Okay. Wanted to make sure.
This would be a quote-unquote higher residential user that's using 12,000 gallons per month. Again, same proportional impact between the two rate structures. But as we look at commercial users in particular, we'll see that we strove our hardest to make sure that they were impacted the least during this conversion process. So those 15,000 to about 100 to 250,000, we really wanted to mitigate the overall impact no matter which rate structure alternative we took a look at. So you'll see here that both the blue line and the red line are almost equal to one another no matter which option is selected. Again, this is a slightly larger commercial. You can think of these as your Chipotles, Jewel-Oscos, things of that nature. And finally, we take a look at some of the larger users. So as we explained, right now under the city's existing rate structure, that $3 per month would really help them out with those rate increases, where the blue line is now well below the red line, where the blue line again is representative of maintaining the city's existing rate structures and passing those rate increases along, where the fixed scaled meter and modified inclining block has that initial increase in fiscal year 24 when we first implement the fixed scaled meter. However, what we'll see is, although that very first number does look high under the lower table, where we see, I think, about 13% or so, that is that conversion process to bring them up to where they should have been, and every subsequent rate increase on their on their monthly bill is pretty low after that. On the most extreme end, we have the 900,000 gallon per month user. Very similar story in this case. Ultimately, our observations are the following. The City of Rolling Meadows is kind of in a unique position in that it actually serves a relatively small number of total population compared to the amount of infrastructure it has and needs to provide due to those large users. You can think of this best as if a single homeowner had its own well, but then decided to share with its neighbor, you can cut that cost in half. But at some point, as you keep expanding, if you just have enough members but a whole new elevated tank, suddenly that cost of the elevated tank is only spread across so many people. And so in reviewing the city's kind of general position, composition, and the number of customers and the type of customers and its existing infrastructure, this is generally the cause of where the City of Rolling Meadows rates might appear higher in general if you were to just do a blanket comparison across any other utility in the immediate vicinity, or even try and find similar utilities that have these very, very, very large users, but only a few of them and mostly residential. In general, supporting extremely large individual users, like I mentioned, this has a more compounding effect than just their water meter, of course. You do have to provide fire flow protection in the form of storage. You have to provide pumps that can pump that quantity of water out. So this cost is ramified through every step of the process. Again, not just those water meters that we're scaling it off of. That's just a way to help us get closer and close that gap for proportionality. And like Molly started us off with, it is an enterprise fund, and that's the core understanding of this, is that these rates are what drive everything for improvements. There are no other reliable sources of money that we have. There was the ARPA parallel amount, that's a grant, but the federal government necessarily isn't handing out grants every year at this time. So with that, we have identified that rate increases will be necessary in order to maintain a more proactive stance. In every instance, addressing aging infrastructure before it fails is going to be significantly more cheaper than addressing it when it's broken, especially with parts, labor, and shortages going on in all sectors right now. This has compounding effects where a break cannot be fixed in a reasonable amount of time, and that can lead to even more non-revenue water and cause this to cycle out of control very quickly. We would recommend implementing the fixed scale meter and modified inclining block at this time to the city, as it allows the most versatility to control the finite rates to the specific customers that exist for the city of Rolling Meadows. And finally, annual updates should be taken with this. We know that we projected out to fiscal year 2031. However, we are not, omnipresent, and we cannot predict the future well beyond 2 to 3 years. So with that, we do recommend that the city continue to observe this carefully, and if those rate increases, which are fairly conservative at this time and present kind of a realistic but still worst-case scenario, they can be adjusted down if we find that things come in lower or that capital does not need to be addressed immediately and can be planned out and phased out to allow those rate increases to occur over a longer period of time. With that, are there any questions?
Thank you very much. That was a lot of information. Go ahead, Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And just a 101 on the access fee, and thanks to the team and everybody for the detail on the questions shared earlier. Is like, for those properties that have multiple meters, is that fixed rate per meter? Like, can you just give a high-level 101? Like,
Sure.
Our residential houses have 1 meter in, but these others that have 6, 8, I don't even know, like for additional fire, water, and things like that, which is certainly needed. Is that per meter that's on that property or per physical mailing address?
Per metered account.
Okay.
So I think one of the largest customer accounts that exist has a total of 4 meters.
Okay.
There are 2 6-inch meters on that property, and then there is a 2-inch meter on that property and a 3/4-inch service. So generally, you could think of that as your administrative office support side, and then manufacturing plants behind that, where it needs several meters to generate the amount of water for their process.
Okay.
Where that fixed scale meter does seem pretty high, that they have 2 6-inch meters, a 2-inch meter, and then a 3/4-inch meter. Where this is kind of offset is when you have 2 6-inch meters and you're using up to 1 million gallons per month, you're not being double whammied in that case. For that first 5,000 gallons, you are charged the $12.36. For the next 10,000 gallons to get you up to 15,000, you are also being charged $12.36 in that first year. So there's no double counting in that sense, where we're trying to just penalize them in particular.
Okay, so there's a per meter access rate, but the overall volume of water
Is still per
is
meter as well.
Thank you. That helps clarify the great example that Molly and Rob provided back to council. Okay, that helps me visualize. Okay, thank you.
Alderman
Thank
Veneziano.
you. So, on an average, so if a residential customer, I would say probably in the summer months, like they're refilling their pool, watering their lawns, especially, that very beginning of summer, how often would they go over that initial tier, do you think?
Based on historical data, not very often. I think it is hard to conceptualize how much is 15,000 gallons, but during peak summer months, residents, again, for a 2 to 3 person household, on average with irrigation, you're not breaching more than about 9,000 gallons on average. Now, if you have a household of more than 4 to 5 people and a pool and you're irrigating it, you might get close to 15,000, but in general, that 15,000 is comprehensive of normal residential users and even on the higher end of residential users at that.
Okay, so it's safe to say most of our residential will be under that 15,000 tier.
Correct.
And so I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, it's a big jump between 15 to 100, right? And so what would quantify that as far as like, and put this in perspective, like a type of business from
Sure.
a place? Because again.
Yes, yeah.
15,000 to 100,000.
So we did take a look at actual accounts when we were generating those tiers. So we are not fabricating those numbers out of thin air. We really took a look at where are the natural breaks between the types of users that happen to exist. So the 15,000 to about 100,000, those are your small businesses. Those are the ones that don't use water like heavily in terms of food or manufacturing or processing or car washes. Those are the businesses that just have a larger water meter, and it's meant for commercial purposes. So stores that are not water driven, any type of small businesses generally. I think the Fratello's actually does qualify too, across the street here. Once you get past the 100 to 250,000, those are going to be closer to your larger commercial processes. So Chipotle's, Jewel Osco's, anything that has large, HVAC needs, cooling needs, water needs for that type of stuff. Once you break the 250,000 tier, those are specialized manufacturers by and large.
That helps, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions? Go ahead, Alderman Bessesi.
When you were calculating out these rates, can I assume that any decisions that the council may make regarding our ARPA funds are not included in those? Because I know we had talked about potentially using our ARPA funds for water infrastructure.
I'll let Molly answer.
No, so if you go back to the report on that first page when we talk about the fund balance, the ARPA parallel, because remember, we're transferring money from general fund, the 3 million we have in reserve in FY '23 with the intention of using it. So the capital expense is shown, and to help you see like an average of what we're doing for capital, but as he went through it, you know, we would like to project a much higher capital program projects for the future years, but we scaled it back. So it's actually the 3 million for the ARPA parallel is really kind of taken out of looking at what we spend for capital on a like going forward basis. Because we put the money aside in reserve and it'll be spent specifically on the projects that we identify through that master plan. I'm not sure if we identified them yet, but we're working on it for that $3 million. So it doesn't carry
So it's
forward.
not really in there.
Right, so it does not carry forward, sorry.
It's a one-time.
So it's not really, okay, so if if the council decides that, given our aging infrastructure, if the council decided to accelerate investment in that infrastructure with the ARPA funds, it would not necessarily impact this because we'd be using the ARPA funds.
Correct, so that,
Okay.
right, that funding is essentially its own little silo compared
Okay.
to what we're looking at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Budmats.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So I'm looking at the larger users, specifically people like Saratoga Condo Association, Carriageway Condos, Fountains on Carriageway. So am I correct in assuming that these are our largest, amongst our largest 20 users? However, if we were to take each living unit and charge them the $3 or the $6 per month, as if they had a 3/4 inch service per unit, they would be paying much more than what we're looking at by giving them this rate.
So you're saying to, instead of replacing the condo or multi-tenant complex that may have a single 3-inch meter, charging each individual kind of unit at that 3/4 inch equivalent? Is that the question being asked?
Yes?
That is actually coming down to a billing question on how they are processed.
Yeah, so some of those show up as our larger users because they have the 1 meter and that association pays. So they must internally bill their residents, or it's included in their homeowner's fee or some way that they recoup what they pay for the utility. So in those instances, that group pays one bill for the 1 meter for the use for the entire thing. There are some, I just don't know off the top of my head, some of the smaller ones where you can have things metered individually, but that's not typical. And if they did, let's say we had a 4-person unit, instead of doing 1 meter, they brought in 4 meters, they would each be individually billed. And they would each be charged like the 3/4 meter for each unit versus where the ones you're citing are 1 meter, so it's 1 access fee.
1 meter for hundreds of users.
Correct.
Okay.
So where their bill will be, I guess, impacted by the changes is not so much in the access fee, right? It will change based on their meter size, but the portion of their bill that would be more impacted by the changes with the block structure with the volume is how much they use. So there are hundreds of people in that area, so they're using that much more water, so it'll be reflected on their volume bill with those different ones that you
But it
cited.
still seems like they're getting a deal, if you will, concerned to 200 homeowners all in a row on Owl versus 200 homeowners all in Saratoga condominiums.
Right, so they're only being billed for the 1 meter, correct?
Okay.
Versus
Thank
homeowners
you.
that would be billed individually there.
All right, thank you.
Alderman O'Brien?
No, I think
Oh,
that's a
say the
great
same
point,
thing.
Alderman. But do we even infrastructure-wise have a way to do, it doesn't sound like it, because they're like, we wouldn't, like, we know that, like, what the physical addresses or things like that, but if we wanted to pursue that, do we have a way to even track what that would be? I imagine we'd have to, because we know what physical addresses are and units are.
We do, I just don't know, we'd have to look into it more to see if there was a way to do it. We went with the meters, because that seemed, well, one, we have that data in our system, so we can
Right.
tell who's on what meter, and that seems, when they did all the research, to correlate with, water usage, so we felt that was a nice connection. I can look more into how we would look at those units with kind of 1 meter for a large facility.
Molly,
So-
I can add some clarification to that as well. So right now, for a single complex that has a 3-inch meter, and the concern where they're getting a deal because they are not individually being charged this access fee versus how do you meter their volume water? So like Molly was mentioning, because you have a single meter entering for several people that live in this complex, where they are being paid their proportional share is actually in those inclining blocks. Since you're talking about the cumulative use for a given month that all of these homeowners are doing, that gets progressively more expensive the more water is going through that meter. So in the question of, does a single homeowner use more than 15,000 gallons? No. But do several homeowners that share that one 3-inch meter do? Yes. And so they are being paid their fair share, whereas if you split that out into every single unit that then pays the 3/4-inch equivalent rate, now you have the conundrum of, are we double counting on them? Because we actually only have one physical meter to measure the total amount of water that all of these homeowners are using within that complex. So it is a balance, and it is something that could be investigated. However, they are not necessarily getting a straight discount in this context because they are being charged that proportionally greater amount through that single meter.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Venezia?
Thank you. So to follow up with that, and maybe I misunderstood, but part of the idea of reviewing this, and especially with the access fees, is to help build our future infrastructure, right? And so we know, especially with these large apartment complexes, that they're putting a bigger strain on our infrastructure. We know that those, like, we just had that meeting, that those areas are, we have weak points that we need to look at. So if I take then the water, they're paying for more water, but they're getting more water. So I take that as a wash. Like, they're getting more water, they're paying for what they're getting. But the access fees, I'm looking at as we're helping to build, future revenue for our infrastructure. So I'm kind of on the same page with Alderman Budmats here, that we got to kind of separate them at this point when we're looking at those complexes. And I would assume that with our very integrated software system that we have now, with that we could tell, like, this apartment complex has 10 units. I mean, they have to file all of those permits and licensing and occupancies.
We can take a look. So part of the equation of establishing fees as a local government is identifying the nexus between the fee you're charging and the thing that you are charging for. And so in the way that Baxter and Woodman had approached it, in order to make that equity argument, while they are using more water and paying more, the proposed tiered approach and adding that higher volume amount with a much larger cost affixed to it attempts to get at the fact that they are putting a larger burden on our water infrastructure and requiring us to impose implement larger expense infrastructure into our system. But we can take a look at the fixed rate fee and see if there is that nexus and if we would be able to do something like that. But in the way that it was proposed this evening, it was that volume-based and the tiered approach and increasing the tiers was the way in which we were attempting to address those large users putting that heavy burden on our system.
Okay. I know I would be interested in seeing the comparison to see what the difference would be. And then to maybe have more data on really what are those, like, larger scale complexes, like their water usage, and then with this new proposal, what does that look like?
We can prepare scenarios
Okay.
and share that with the council.
Thank you.
Alderman Budmets.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So on a totally separate issue, if we're going to be increasing the average homeowner's water, and especially after so many thousands of gallons, I know that we also have the capability, well, I'm assuming we do, have the capability of noticing large jumps in an individual homeowner's usage. And so I can tell you that when our business was in Schaumburg, it was not uncommon. I mean, maybe once or twice a year, we'd get a phone call from Schaumburg, and they're like, hey, your water usage is like much higher in the last week and a half, 2 weeks than it usually is. Do you know if you have a problem? And so are we making those phone calls presently, and especially in cases where we're going to be starting to charge people a higher rate because they're using 15,000 gallons instead of the 5,000 gallon rate? I want us to be responsible to our homeowners that we're taking advantage of that technology and actually informing them that when we know there's a problem.
We do that now. So we run rates to see high usage reports, and if they're kind of out of whack to what the resident or the business had seen before, we do make calls. We walk through, when residents do call back, ways they can test and see, is their toilet running and they don't realize it. We also, if they request, Public Works will come out and help, look at the meter, and they do the bucket. But I don't know the exact terms for it. There's a bucket. Director Grothoff could probably fill you in on that.
Aaron, before you jump in, if I could real quick. So another system that we're implementing is fixed point reading, a fixed point antenna reading system. So currently we still, while we have the automated reader systems, we still are having our staff drive to specific areas throughout the community in order to pull reads, and that is happening on a monthly basis. With a fixed point reading system, that process happens automatically and can happen daily. So what we gain through that is the potential to be able to get more real-time data where we can identify if there's a sudden spike and utilize that data in a way where we can reach out and provide notification of a water leak potential or some sort of issue that's arising. I don't know if Public Works can elaborate on this further.
Yes, thank you, Manager Sabo. So we will be bringing forward in the future the fixed point AMI reading system with our current water meter provider, Census. And what that system does is we put up, as he said, kind of 2 antennas on towers, and as he stated, we can read those meters, because currently we're driving around every time we want to read meters. We'll be able to now kind of press a button from our office, instantaneously get those reads, and we'll be able to do so on a more frequent basis to allow us to detect these leaks much sooner and detect these high usages much quicker than we have been in the past. So we will be able to identify, to your point, Alderman Budmets and Alderman O'Brien, that leak detection a little bit quicker if there is, or if maybe they're running, high water for a pool and they left that on and it's been running for 2 days straight now and the pool is overflowing, or they forgot it there on
Or
vacation.
forgot to plug it.
Yeah, so we are able to see those things now with the implementation of that new system, which should be coming down the pipeline.
And so our plan is, I know that there's other communities out there that have already installed these systems, so our plan is to get that system integrated into our water infrastructure and then look at what kind of components that come with Census to be able to provide that automated alarm so that we can reach out and notify anyone who might be experiencing a leak or some sort of spike in use.
Because then it seems a lot more fair to charge people for heavy usage when they've been warned, hey, your usage has gone up and you're now a heavy user.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other?
Just one last thing. How often have we raised the utility rates in the past? Because I know refuse has been since 2014.
Right, so the last time the utility rates was raised in FY19, prior to that, it looked like it was pretty consistent, 5% each year to tie with the JAWA increase, well, City of Chicago and then through JAWA to us. So they were staying kind of on par with the water purchase increase at the 5% for the years before that. But in 2019, there was a temporary stop on the increase. I think it was, they were going through the partial rate review with Baxter Woodman, and then with the changeover in staff, By last year, when we recommended on the budget, was let's keep it for one more year at the same rate, so we had time to actually do a more in-depth look. So it's been at the same monthly rate from FY19 till now.
Okay, and the fixed costs have stayed the same for that same
Correct.
amount of time? Okay.
Is there anything else? Alderman
Well,
O'Brien?
is that what you're looking for, like, I think
Yeah.
we're all, I can't speak about it, but like, I'm in agreement, like, we do need to do an increase. I mean, it's the infrastructure, like, it's a no-brainer, like, type thing. Looking at, I do like scenario 3, my kind of sticker shock was 5%, but I'm also trying to balance that with knowing a refuse fee is certainly needed too. And my just threshold of talking to a couple residents that have reached out on this is like 5% seemed to be the threshold, but then I'm thinking, okay, that's 10% overall between refuse and utility. But I like the scenario 3 in this scenario where it's kind of like that staggered approach, knowing it'll take us a little bit longer to get to that surplus for the infrastructure. But as we've all seen, we're dealing with a real life situation right now at Kirchhoff and 53. That's a few $100,000 to get corrected, where it'd be nice to have some additional money in the rainy day fund to build our infrastructure, because we've seen the numbers on the water mains we've broken over the years, where it's going to eventually be cheaper to maintain the infrastructure than send out the public works guys and gals on emergency call on a Sunday afternoon to fix a water main that pops. So that's just from my perspective as scenario 3, and now it's the balancing act of if it's 5% for utility and 5% for refuse. But yeah.
What direction exactly are we looking towards this evening?
So for this evening, given that there's a vast amount of information that we've shared with the council, we wanted to give time for digestion of all of this. So our intent for this evening's discussion was to answer any questions and to present the information. We still do have time as we start to get into our fiscal stability planning process, as well as the budget planning process for FY24, where we will actually come back with this item to the council for further discussion and seek direction at that time.
Okay.
So in addition, we can share the PowerPoint, so if there's anyone that would like to see it, or we can post that PowerPoint just so that that information's out there, and in case anyone would like to revisit that
I
information
think
as
that
well.
would be ideal for now. Yes.
Before we move on to the refuse rate discussion, I also just want to ensure that in our minutes and record for today is that we, as a council, we were aware of the requirements for the investment in this infrastructure, and over the past 3 years, we were dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and as a council made a conscious decision to freeze rates, and also we did not pursue any water shutoffs as well, and we have a discussion with that as well. So if there are any residents who are curious about the equitability of or the equity related to this policy or the rate increases, to please reach out. We're happy to discuss that.
Thank you, Alderman Smoka. Okay, so I think our next presentation is on the refuse.
Correct.
Okay.
And thanks to Baxter Woodman for really doing kind of
Yes,
the
thank
lion's
you very
share on
much.
that. It was very helpful. And like City Manager Sabo said, the refuse rate discussion, again, is for information for you to digest. We're going to take your input, and part of this fiscal stability plan is it will come back, but we want to give you kind of parts of it to take time to kind of think about it, go through it, look at your impact, input, come back with follow-up. But then when we look at kind of that 5-year financial forecast and what we're looking at for the 24 budget, that will be more of the time when we say, okay, what is the decision on what we want to do? Here's utility, here's refuse, and look at your budget as a whole. So you can make kind of more of a comprehensive decision on everything instead of just bits and pieces. So we want to give you the information so you have time to digest everything in different bits and pieces, but we'll come back and kind of ask for guidance later on in this stability plan. So on to refuse. We partnered with the University of Illinois in Chicago, and we're lucky to have 4 great master's students in this process. And they really focused on kind of different aspects of the fiscal stability plan for finance, and one of them was looking at these refuse rates. So first, our current state of the refuse fund, it's going to sound very similar to utilities. We haven't, there was a conscious decision not to raise rates. The rates in this fund haven't been raised since FY14. The monthly rate is the $29.95. It's an enterprise fund, so we're looking at how do we support our business-like operations? We did move with this budget the host and tipping fees and the transfer station revenue permanently to the refuse fund, so that does help. And you can kind of see where that, in future graphs, you'll see kind of where we jump up a little bit with that. But it didn't kind of solve where we're looking at for fund balance in the refuse fund. We currently have a policy that we want to keep 30 to 50% in that fund balance, and we're at 16. So it was moving up, but we haven't gotten towards our target. So thinking about that, we looked at our comparable communities. You can see a lot of them are privatized, and they're kind of different. The operations of the privatized, typically operations are all through the privatized route, but whether or not they bill in-house or through that privatized refuse company is different. So Arlington Heights does everything outsourced, but like Palatine does the billing in-house, but the operations is privatized. So there's just kind of different aspects. If you look at us compared to others, we are at the high end of our monthly rate. But when we kind of look at this and say, well, what services do we provide? So we just broke it down to compare to Arlington Heights, Palatine, and Wheeling. They're similar to us. We are, if you look at the graph or the chart, the pink is kind of the least generous, to the dark green is the most generous. So again, our monthly fee is high, but if we start to look at what's included, right, our trash, unlimited. Other places there are certain caps. What I thought was interesting is Arlington Heights, we do unlimited yard waste there, it's not included, but if you want to do the subscription for yard waste, you add $11.11 per month. So now you're pretty comparable to what you're paying in Rolling Meadows. Same with Palatine. If you want to do like an electronics waste, you have to pay another $20 in that month. So now they become actually higher than us in that month. So as we look through the services provided, Rolling Meadows is very generous with what we provide. We have a lot of instances where we're unlimited in the waste that we will collect compared to our comparable communities. As we kind of keep going down the list, you can see the one difference. I think we stand out a little bit differently is we do a flat rate, and then we don't have any discounts for senior, active military, or low income. But again, the total services we provide are really generous compared to our comparable communities. And when you start adding up what you need to pay for the other services that you would receive here, those communities' rates really do come closer to where we're at right now. Oh, I kind of went through those. I didn't realize they were on the, I forgot they were on the slide. So our UIC analysis recommendation. So when we kind of go through this, they looked at, the current state, where we need to go to keep operations, looking at, we had put together with the capital plan last year, that through the 5 years, and we used what we had projected for expenditures in that 5-year plan that was part of the FY23 budget process. And then we looked at what we need for revenues. So the UIC analysis really looked at, one, we need to raise rates. If you want to raise rates, you can maintain our service levels. Like I said, we're very generous in what we offer, but there's multiple ways to implement this. So we can do, a one-time rate increase, and then see next year and come back to council and see if we have another one. We can do recurring in their analysis. They said maybe we tie to the rate of inflation, right? Or do we look at some other ways? So if we looking at rate of inflation, inflation jumps all over. So if I looked at the past few years of what inflation is, 2019, the rate would have gone up 54 cents because the increase would have been 1.8%. But in 2020, we had a higher year, 2022, and 2021 were higher years at 6.5% or 7%. So there's a little bit of a difference each year if you base it on something like inflation or CPI. And if we did use CPI, there are some actually negative CPI years. So would we have held the rate flat, or do you go down on those years? So there's some consideration with tying it to something like that. Or you can look at, well, what's 25 cents do? So if we increase it 25 cents, it's a little less than 1%. Here's what we get. All the way up to $2. That's what I've given you, kind of the increment up to the $2 scenario. But what you can see, kind of both of these tables is the fund balance percentage at the end. We are ticking up, but not in one instance do we hit the 30% minimum fund balance policy we have. So it will take cumulative years to reach that. If you went $1.50 a year of an increase, so if we increased it $1.50, then I have this written out. No, I don't have a page right in front of me. Sorry. We would reach our 30% in FY. Sorry. We'd reach our 30% level in FY23 if you went up $1.50, and you'd be at like 52% fund balance if you continued that $1.50 through FY31. And the total increase would be $12 a month in that FY31 year. So that gets us more aggressive towards doing our fund balance, and if we want to really build a reserve. If you want to do half that, if you look at like 75 cents a month increase, we reach the bottom of our fund balance at that 30%, it's really 32% it gets us to in FY30. So it's a more gradual growth. Again, we can look at these as we stick to a same dollar amount increase per year, or we can adjust that each year on the budget to kind of scale and reach that range and stay within that 30 to 50% range. But that gives you some idea of what it would take to get us to the 30%, the minimum of our fund balance policy. So you would have to, at 75 cents, raise it over 7 years to get to just the bottom of that policy. But again, if it's a planned, right, planned and set growth to the fund balance, and we set the effort that these years are going to increase because we know we're going to reach our fund balance policy by this year, then, you know, we're making steps to address where we're at in this fund. So everything that UIC analysis was on was trying to identify how do we get back to within our fund balance policy. And then the other option that was provided by UIC was privatization of the refuse collection. This would shift the operations to an outsourced company. There would be options on whether or not you would do the billing in-house or go with outsource. But this one will take time. It's not an immediate solution, like we couldn't switch and be ready in '24 for this. We'd have to build in a few years' time to switch operations for this. And the staff, which you have 4 full-time equivalents in the refuse fund, are critical employees in our public works operations. They respond to snow, other emergencies, and they do help with other things within Public Works Department that we would have to look at and see how do you plan for all of that. So this one would take longer in time to implement if we went this way. So tonight's goal, again, is really, it's not to have a decision tonight. We're giving you a lot of kind of options here in both utilities and refuse, and they're not always the easiest to digest or understand immediately, so it'll take some time to think through. I'll bring back any follow-up, and then we'll incorporate that into the fiscal stability plan. So really, now do you have any questions on refuse?
Alderman Bessetti.
Okay, the one thing I can say is, our council, and I think everyone in the council knows this, we need to tread very carefully here. This is one of those third rails. Overwhelming vote by our residents on a referendum not to privatize. The number one of the top comments I've gotten in my 4 years as alderman is nobody wants services reduced. And most residents seem to understand the trade-off in the monthly bill versus what they're getting, So, though I won't be on the council by the time this comes up, I would strongly suggest you just erase privatizing from your mind. Period.
Thank you.
The other thing is whatever solution is derived, and I do understand with COVID and with other things over the last for years. There were reasons why we did not address the refuse fund. I was in agreement with all of that. However, I've always been someone who has thought that these enterprise funds, they obviously need to fund themselves. And my biggest concern with enterprise funds is that when you're under the balance, there is the potential to impact our rating by not adhering to our fund balances, which would then cost us money in interest and stuff like that. The last thing I wanted to just ask is really simple. The refuse fund is at 30% is the bottom balance.
Correct.
Is that because of the size? It's just a much smaller balance, a much smaller fund? Whereas some of the other funds, most of the other funds that we have are at 25%?
Yeah, so that policy was actually set before I was here, so I don't really know the mindset of why they picked 30 to 50, but looking at it now, it makes sense to me because it is a smaller operation, so when something happens that's unexpected, it would take more of an impact on this fund to be able to address that and then build that balance back up. So I think they probably put kind of a little bit higher cushion on here, so we have more of an ability to address something that would occur that was unplanned. So to me, really the similar thing is in water. You currently have the water main breaks we're dealing with right now. That's an unplanned expense. It's a significant amount of time and resources and money that we have to now find for something we weren't planning. And if something on that kind of scale for the refuse fund occurred, we would have a harder time kind of rebuilding from dealing with that unplanned event.
Understood. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, Alderman Veneziano.
Thank you. So I had asked originally when this got proposed, whatever, way back in 2019 when we decided not to increase rates, that we do look at doing a senior discount. I've had many senior residents say, I pulled out my one little Jewel garbage bag and I pay the same as the resident next door, that fills up their garbage can. So it's something that I really would like you guys to take a look at and doing similar to other municipalities of doing that senior discount. Thanks.
Thank you. Alderman O'Brien.
I was going to say, very similar to what Alderman Bessetti said. I think we have clear direction, at least from my perspective, is maybe staff time looking at Alderman Veneziano's idea or what the potential rate increase could be, because I think we're all in agreement. We are at that time for that. But I think we could, just my own opinion, is we could focus staff time on different scenarios and keep prioritizing off. I don't even think we need to go there. I would not be in support of that by any means, based on the past referendum, and also, as we all learned as the totals rolled out, don't touch what I can put at the curb. So I think that's very clear direction. That's just my thought as a third ward alderman. The feedback I received is don't even consider privatizing, which I fully agree with, as well as don't touch what I can put at the curb, is maybe like just focus the staff time on different scenarios and role playing to see what numbers we could work with for an increase and save the time from even considering privatization and impacting the service level, because it's top notch and that's what residents have come to expect, and it does come at a cost, and that's the crossroads we're at now, is the great service comes at a cost.
Anyone else? I mean, from what I'm seeing, we haven't had a rate increase in going on 10 years now. But also, I'm looking at, and after last week's committee of the whole talking about our transfer station, the asset that brings to the city, definitely looking at that as an additional revenue stream, especially with that contract coming up in 2026. But just really keeping an eye on that situation, I think, is going to be really important. Alderman Budmats.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I think it's going to be, some of the residents will probably look at it a little disingenuous to say that we haven't had an increase since 2014 when we are having increased fees due to the cans that are being charged for that weren't prior charged for the Corrados. Didn't we increase those?
No.
We did not.
That was a big discussion
City
we had.
sucked it
The
up.
city, we absorbed it. Yeah,
We
Yeah.
paid for it out of the
We paid
equipment
for that.
replacement fund.
yeah.
Oh, never mind.
There was a lot of discussion around that, though, so you're right.
Because I remember it was talking about increasing that, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, forget it.
Alderman Veneziano.
Just to help with staff as far as direction, I feel that tying this to any inflation or anything like that is not really a good way to go because it is so unstable and unpredictable. So I am in much more favor of a gradual, steady increase. Same way that we just spoke about with water and waste. So that would be more what I would be interested in versus tying it to anything else.
And so what we can do is we can take the gradual increase rates, we presented a number of different options, and we can run some graphical representations of what that would look like and when we would get to that fund balance target. And we can come back to the council with those scenarios and at that time seek council direction and moving forward. So.
Great. Anything else?
I would say really that is the next steps. We have he's changing the presentation on me. Hold on. I did include kind of the next steps in that fiscal stability plan. There are points for council and public participation opportunities. So we're really going to try to get more involvement in this budget process and getting more input where we can throughout this whole kind of new budget year we have. And then you can see it laid out, kind of what are the next steps that we're going to do within the stability plan. So right now we're really at the top with the utilities and the refuse rate, but then we'll come back with where we're at in like a 5-year forecast with current services, what's that look like, and then come back with any changes to the budget, come back with input from here, bring forward any more fund balance policies or other fiscal policies. Right now we have a draft of debt management we're working on, so as those come we will be bringing you back a lot more. So we're trying to make this a much more involved process but give you kind of bits and pieces as we go, so it's not all at once and here's your big budget book and make a decision. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Alderman O'Brien.
I appreciate some of the public input there too. Can that be sooner than later? Because I know we're in second quarter now and the budget process is going to start. So there's and I know we exchanged before more than just the news and views and things like that, which I know staff is on top of right now. But I'm just wondering from a engagement perspective and getting the word out that, hey, council is discussing this now, because before we know it, we're going to be the end of second quarter and making budget decisions for 2024. And so just the sooner we can start, I know we've all circulated it with our residents based on tonight's discussion, but the sooner I think we can get the input, the better, versus we're in the budget throes already.
Yeah, and we did purchase, council saw the Balancing Act software.
Yep.
It's a more kind of interactive tool that we're going to pilot this year. You guys get to be our first test, right? I want to make sure that there's any bugs that it goes through here before we roll it out to the entire public. But it that tool I thought was neat. There's different things. I can give you a scenario and the balance is unbudgeted or unbalanced, and you have to find a way to balance it. And, we can put up different scenarios. Do you want to raise this rate? Do you want to cut this service? Fun things like that. Or there's a prioritized option where you don't have to do the math, but you can say this one's my first priority. And so there's different ways we can get input, but because it'll be kind of really the pilot this year, we'll see how well it goes.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Anything else?
So
Yes.
we will go ahead and PDF the PowerPoint presentations from this evening. We'll put them on the homepage of the website so
Right.
that way anyone who'd like to see them has access to them. So we'll get that out there as soon as we can.
All right, that's great. All right, well, if there is no further discussion, I'm going to look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A second. Thank you, Veneziano and Alderman Budmats. This meeting is adjourned.
All those in favor?
Oh, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those please say nay. The ayes have it, and we are adjourned.
you.